What if I told you the Mafia and Fortune 500 companies run the exact same playbook? Territory, loyalty, silence, and eliminating anyone who threatens the operation. That's not a street gang. That's Enron. That's Wall Street. And nobody wants to talk about it. Until now. I spent months researching this. The patterns are undeniable. Same hierarchy, same code of silence, same protection from the top. They created over 3,000 fake companies to hide billions. And when it collapsed, 20,000 employees lost everything. The executives, golden parachutes, mansions, speaking fees. This playbook didn't die with Enron. It's still running today. Wirecard, FTX, Theranos, same tactics, different suits. In this video, I'm breaking down the 7 tactics they use, so you can recognize it, protect yourself, and never be fooled again.
What if I told you that the only difference between the Cosa Nostra and some of America's most powerful corporations is the dress code? Think about it for a second. Picture this scene. New York, 1985. John Gotti, the infamous Teflon Don, walks out of a federal courthouse in a $2,000 suit, smirking at the cameras while FBI agents grind their teeth in frustration. Now fast forward to Houston, December 2001. Jeffrey Skilling, former CEO of Enron, steps out of his luxury high-rise, surrounded by lawyers as reporters scream questions about billions of dollars that vanished into thin air. Same confident stride, same expensive tailoring, same absolute certainty that the rules don't apply to them. So here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask out loud. What exactly separates organized crime from organized business? Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might fundamentally change how you see Wall Street, corporate America, and the entire architecture of white-collar crime. See, we've been trained to think of criminals in a very specific way. They're supposed to look dangerous. They operate in shadows, in back alleys, in neighborhoods we'd never visit. They use violence and intimidation. They run drugs, weapons, protection rackets. That's crime, right? That's what the movies taught us. But here's the thing. The most sophisticated criminal organizations in American history didn't operate out of social clubs in Brooklyn or warehouses in New Jersey. They operated out of glass towers in Manhattan and Houston, with corner offices, stock options, and seats on charity boards. They didn't need baseball bats to destroy lives. They had something far more powerful: spreadsheets, shell companies, and an army of Ivy League lawyers who knew exactly how to make theft look like innovation. You've probably heard of Enron. Maybe you watched a documentary, read a headline, vaguely remember something about an energy company that collapsed. But I'm willing to bet you've never heard the story told like this. As the moment America's corporate elite revealed, they'd been running the same playbook as street gangs all along: territory, loyalty, silence, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened the operation. Does that sound like a Fortune 500 company to you? Or does it sound like something else entirely? When Enron finally imploded in late 2001, it wasn't just the largest bankruptcy in American history at that time. It was a curtain being pulled back on a system of financial crime so elaborate, so brazen, and so deeply protected by the establishment that most people couldn't even process what they were seeing. We're talking about executives who created more than 3,000 fake companies to hide debt, accountants who shredded documents by the truckload, a culture where questioning the boss wasn't just discouraged, it was career suicide. And at the center of it all, a tight inner circle that operated with the loyalty codes and omerta of any crime family you've ever heard of. But here's what most people miss, and this is crucial. Enron didn't invent this game, not even close. They simply perfected a playbook that had been quietly developing on Wall Street for decades. A playbook that explains why certain corporations seem untouchable, why executives who steal billions get slaps on the wrist while street-level criminals rot in prison for decades, why the phrase "too big to fail" somehow became too big to jail. Have you ever wondered why that is? Have you ever felt like the rules of the game are rigged in ways you can't quite articulate? What I'm about to break down for you is the anatomy of corporate organized crime. The structures, the tactics, the psychology, and most importantly, the people who make it all possible. Because understanding this playbook isn't just about history. It's about recognizing the patterns that are still unfolding right now, in companies whose names you see every single day. And before we go any deeper into this rabbit hole, I need to pause for just a moment and talk directly to you. Because if what I've described so far resonates with something you've felt but couldn't quite name, that nagging sense that the system operates by two completely different rule books depending on who you are, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Here's the thing about content like this. It doesn't get pushed by algorithms. Videos about corporate crime, financial corruption, the hidden architecture of power, they don't trend the way celebrity gossip or viral challenges do. The only way this information reaches more people is through you. So if this topic matters to you, if you believe more people need to understand how these systems actually work, hit that like button right now. It sounds simple, almost trivial, but that single click tells the algorithm this content deserves to be seen. It's genuinely how we fight back against a system designed to keep us uninformed. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever worked for a company where you felt something was off? Where the culture demanded loyalty above ethics? Where asking the wrong question meant putting a target on your back? Or maybe you've watched a corporation destroy lives and walk away with nothing but a fine that amounted to pocket change? Drop your story below. Share what's on your mind right now. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a conversation, and your perspective adds something I can't provide on my own. The comments section becomes valuable when real people share real experiences, and honestly, some of the most important insights I've encountered have come from viewers who live through the things I research. If you're new here and this is your first time watching, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. I make content about the hidden machinery of money and power, the stories that get buried, the patterns that repeat across decades, the uncomfortable truths about how wealth really operates in this country. This is the kind of material they didn't teach you in school, and it's the kind of material mainstream media rarely touches with any depth. So if you want to keep learning, keep questioning, keep connecting the dots that most people never even see, then welcome to the community. We're building something here, and your presence matters more than you know. Now, with that said, let's get back to Houston, Texas, and unpack exactly how Enron transformed corporate fraud into an art form. So let's talk about structure, because this is where the hidden truth starts to reveal itself in ways that might genuinely shock you. When criminologists study organized crime, they look for specific patterns, predictable architectures that allow illegal operations to function smoothly over extended periods of time. And here's the revelation that changed everything for me when I first started researching this topic. The structural blueprint of a successful crime syndicate is virtually indistinguishable from the organizational chart of a corrupt corporation. We're not talking about vague similarities or loose metaphors here. We're talking about the same fundamental pillars holding up both systems, operating by the same logic, driven by the same psychology, producing the same outcomes. Let me walk you through this, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The first pillar is rigid hierarchy. In traditional organized crime, you have the boss at the top, the Don, the Godfather, whatever you want to call him. Below him, you have underbosses and captains who manage specific territories and operations. Below them, soldiers who execute orders without questioning the bigger picture. Now think about Enron. At the very top, you had Ken Lay, the chairman, the public face, the man who dined with presidents and shaped energy policy. Below him, Jeffrey Skilling, the CEO, the operational mastermind who turned Enron into what he called the world's greatest company. And below Skilling, a network of executives and managers who controlled specific divisions, each one fiercely loyal, each one rewarded handsomely for results, each one understanding implicitly that their job was to deliver numbers, not to ask how those numbers were generated. The hierarchy wasn't just organizational, it was psychological. It created a chain of command where information flowed upward and orders flowed downward, but accountability somehow evaporated at every level. The second pillar is the code of silence. In the mafia, They call it omerta, the sacred oath that you never, under any circumstances, reveal family business to outsiders. Violate that code and you don't just lose your position, you might lose your life. Now, Enron couldn't literally eliminate people who talked, but they developed their own version of omerta that was devastatingly effective. Non-disclosure agreements that could financially destroy anyone who spoke out. A culture of intimidation where employees who raised concerns were publicly humiliated, demoted, or pushed out entirely. Sharon Watkins, the woman who eventually became the most famous whistleblower in corporate history, wrote a memo to Ken Lay warning him that the company was going to implode. You know what happened? Nothing. The company's lawyers investigated her instead of investigating the fraud. The message was crystal clear to everyone watching. Speak up, and you become the problem. The third pillar is territory and dominance. Street gangs fight for corners, for neighborhoods, for control over who can operate in their space. Corporations do the exact same thing, just with different language, market share, competitive advantage, barriers to entry. Enron wasn't content to be a successful energy company. They wanted total dominance. They moved into electricity trading, broadband, water, weather derivatives, anything they could financialize and control. And just like a gang expanding its turf, they were ruthless about eliminating competition. They manipulated California's energy grid, created artificial shortages, drove prices through the roof while people suffered rolling blackouts. This wasn't capitalism. This was economic warfare conducted by people who saw the market as territory to be conquered and defended at any cost. The fourth pillar is concealment, the machinery of hiding what you're actually doing. For traditional crime families, this meant front businesses, laundromats, restaurants, waste management companies that looked legitimate on the surface while dirty money flowed through the books. For Enron, this pillar reached a level of sophistication that made old-school money laundering look primitive. Andrew Fastow, the company's chief financial officer, created a shadow empire of more than 3,000 special-purpose entities, shell companies with names like LJM, Chuco, and Jedi, that existed for one purpose only: to hide billions of dollars in debt off Enron's balance sheet. These weren't real businesses. They were financial illusions, paper constructs designed to make the company look profitable while it was actually drowning in obligations. The transformation of fraud into complexity was the key. By making the scheme so intricate that even sophisticated analysts couldn't follow the money, Fastow ensured that the backstage reality remained invisible to anyone looking at the public performance. And the fifth pillar, perhaps the most important one, is political protection. Every successful criminal organization throughout history has understood that you cannot operate at scale without neutralizing the people who are supposed to stop you. For street-level crime, this might mean bribing local police or paying off a judge. For Enron, it meant something far more elegant and far more corrosive to democracy itself. Between 1989 and 2001, Enron spent millions on campaign contributions, spreading money across both political parties, ensuring that no matter who won elections, they would have friends in power. Ken Lay was so close to the Bush family that employees jokingly called him Kenny Boy. Enron didn't just lobby for favorable legislation, they helped write the laws that were supposed to regulate them. When the Commodity Futures Modernization Act passed in 2000, it contained provisions that Enron's lobbyists had specifically requested, provisions that exempted energy trading from oversight and made their entire business model possible. Now I want you to sit with this for a moment. 5 pillars: hierarchy, silence, territory, concealment, protection. Every single one present in organized crime. Every single one perfected by Enron. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern, a mentality, a decision-making framework that produces the same results whether you're running a crime family in Sicily or a Fortune 500 company in Texas. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because understanding the structure is only the beginning. The real question is, who are the people inside this machine? How do you convince smart, educated, ambitious professionals to participate in fraud on this scale? And that's where the psychology becomes truly disturbing. If any of this is hitting different for you right now, if you're starting to see connections you hadn't noticed before, drop a comment below and write "same playbook." I want to know how many of us are seeing through the illusion together. Here's something that rarely gets discussed when we talk about corporate scandals: And it's perhaps the most uncomfortable revelation of all. The people who make these schemes work aren't monsters. They're not sociopaths lurking in shadows. They're accountants who graduated top of their class. They're young lawyers who dreamed of making partner at prestigious firms. They're analysts who just wanted to build a career and provide for their families. They're people who look exactly like you and me, who started their journey with ambition and optimism, and who somewhere along the way found themselves so deep inside a corrupt machine that getting out seemed impossible. This is the human backstage of white-collar crime, and understanding it changes everything about how we perceive these cases. Because the truth is, criminal organizations, whether they operate on street corners or in corporate towers, don't function without soldiers. And recruiting those soldiers requires a very specific psychological playbook that Enron mastered with terrifying precision. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're 24 years old, fresh out of a top business school, buried in student debt, desperate to prove that all those years of sacrifice were worth it. Enron comes calling. At its peak, this was the 7th largest company in America. Working there meant you'd made it. The starting salaries were extraordinary. The bonuses were life-changing. The prestige was intoxicating. You walk into that Houston headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel, and you feel like you've arrived at the center of the universe. Everyone around you is young, hungry, brilliant. The energy is electric. The message from leadership is clear. We're not just an energy company. We're revolutionizing how business works. You're not joining a corporation. You're joining a movement. This is how the transformation begins. That sense of belonging, of being chosen, of being special. It's incredibly powerful, and Enron weaponized it deliberately. They recruited from elite universities. They paid premium salaries. They created an internal culture that felt more like a fraternity than a workplace. The mentality they cultivated was simple. We're the smartest people in the room. We play by different rules. And if you're with us, you'll be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. Sound familiar? It should. It's the exact same pitch that gang leaders use to recruit young members in disadvantaged neighborhoods. Belonging, status, money, the promise of a better life if you just stay loyal. But here's where the trap closes. Once you're inside, once you've accepted that first bonus, once you've gotten used to a lifestyle you could never afford on a normal salary, the cost of leaving becomes unbearable. And slowly, gradually, the decisions that seemed questionable start seeming normal. You notice irregularities in the numbers. You hear whispers about deals that don't quite make sense. But everyone around you is doing the same thing. Your boss doesn't seem worried. The executives are confident. Maybe you're just being naive. Maybe this is just how business works at the highest levels. You keep your head down. You do your job. You cash your checks. And with each passing month, you become more complicit in something you never fully understood. This is the journey that hundreds of Enron employees experienced. Not evil people making evil decisions, but ordinary people making 1,000 small compromises until they looked up one day and realized they'd helped build a house of cards that was about to collapse on millions of innocent lives. And then there's Sharon Watkins. If you don't know her story, you need to hear it, because it illustrates the impossible position these soldiers find themselves in when their conscience finally breaks through. Watkins was a vice president at Enron, a respected insider who'd worked there for years. In August 2001, just months before the collapse, she wrote a memo to Ken Lay that should have changed everything. In that memo, she laid it all out: the accounting tricks, the hidden partnerships, the fundamental unsustainability of what Enron was doing. She warned him directly that the company was about to implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Her exact words were haunting. "I am incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." Think about the courage that took. Think about the impact that decision could have had on her career, her reputation, her entire life. She was risking everything to tell the truth to a man who had the power to destroy her professionally. And what happened? Ken Lay thanked her for her concerns and handed the memo to the company's lawyers. Those lawyers then spent weeks investigating not the fraud Watkins had exposed, but Watkins herself. They looked into whether she could be fired for disloyalty. They examined whether her concerns were legally actionable against her. The message sent to everyone watching was devastating. The system protects itself, and anyone who threatens it becomes the enemy. Watkins eventually became a celebrated whistleblower, testified before Congress, and helped expose the truth. But she's the exception. For every Sharon Watkins who speaks up, there are hundreds who stay silent, who convince themselves it's not their responsibility, who tell themselves they're just following orders. And can we really blame them? When the choice is between your mortgage payment and your conscience, between your children's college fund and some abstract notion of corporate ethics, the decision isn't as simple as we'd like to pretend. I want you to sit with this question for a moment. Imagine discovering that your work for the last 5 years helped destroy the retirement savings of 20,000 people. That the numbers you crunched, the reports you filed, the meetings you attended, all of it contributed to families losing everything they'd spent decades building. What would you do? What would any of us do? The real hidden truth about white-collar crime is that it depends on the participation of people who never set out to be criminals, who were recruited into a system designed to compromise them gradually, who woke up one day trapped in something they couldn't escape. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because the soldiers are only part of the story. The truly brilliant and truly sinister aspect of what Enron built was the specific playbook of tactics they used to make it all work. 7 distinct moves that became the blueprint for corporate fraud for decades to come. If you've ever felt trapped in a job where the ethics felt questionable, if you've ever had to choose between speaking up and protecting yourself, comment below and write, "I've been there." You're not alone. Let me break down something that most documentaries and news reports completely miss. When we study what Enron did, we're not just looking at one company's failure. We're looking at a comprehensive manual, a step-by-step framework for corporate fraud that has been replicated again and again across decades and continents. 7 specific tactics that form the backbone of virtually every major financial scandal since. Once you understand these moves, you'll start recognizing them everywhere. And that recognition is the first step toward protecting yourself from the impact of these schemes. The first tactic is mark-to-market accounting, and this one requires your full attention because it's the foundation everything else was built on. Here's how it works in plain English. Imagine you sign a contract today to deliver energy to a client over the next 20 years. Traditional accounting would recognize that revenue gradually, as you actually perform the work and collect the payments. But mark-to-market allows you to estimate all the profits you expect to make over those 20 years and book them immediately, right now, as if you'd already earned the money. Sounds insane, right? It is. But it's technically legal under certain circumstances, and Enron exploited this loophole with ruthless creativity. They would sign long-term contracts, make wildly optimistic projections about future prices, and then report those imaginary future profits as current earnings. Wall Street loved it. The stock price soared, and nobody seemed to notice that the cash wasn't actually there. This mentality of counting your chickens before they hatch, actually before the eggs are even laid, became the engine that powered Enron's meteoric rise and inevitable collapse. The second tactic we already touched on, but it deserves deeper examination. Special Purpose Entities, or SPEs. Andrew Fastow didn't just create shell companies. He built an entire shadow financial system, a parallel universe where Enron's debt could live invisibly, hidden from investors and regulators. The backstage complexity was staggering. These entities had names that sounded like they belonged in a science fiction novel. Jedi, Chuko, LJM, Raptor. And the revelations about how they actually worked shocked even seasoned financial analysts. Fastow would create a partnership, have Enron guarantee its debts, use it to buy Enron's worst-performing assets at inflated prices, and then report those sales as profits. The debt stayed hidden. The earnings looked real. And Fastow personally made tens of millions of dollars running these entities on the side. This tactic has been copied by nearly every major corporate fraud since. Wirecard used it to hide billions in fake cash, and countless other companies have used similar structures to massage their balance sheets. The third tactic is the corruption of the gatekeepers. Arthur Andersen was one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world, trusted to audit major corporations and verify that their numbers were real. But here's the hidden truth that should disturb everyone. By the time Enron collapsed, Arthur Andersen was earning more money from Enron in consulting fees than in audit fees. Think about the perverse incentive that creates. The people who were supposed to be checking Enron's homework were also being paid handsomely to help Enron cheat. When your watchdog is eating from the same bowl as the wolf, you don't have a watchdog anymore. Arthur Andersen partners sat in Enron's offices full-time. They approved accounting decisions that any first-year student would have questioned, and when the investigation started, they shredded documents by the ton. The transformation of auditor into accomplice wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate strategy. The fourth tactic is systematic intimidation of anyone who asks questions. This is where the gangster mentality becomes impossible to ignore. Enron maintained a list of Wall Street analysts and rated them based on how favorable their coverage was. Analysts who gave positive ratings got access, exclusive interviews with executives, early information about deals, invitations to investor events. Analysts who expressed skepticism were frozen out, publicly attacked, and in some cases saw their careers destroyed. One analyst at a major bank questioned Enron's business model and was reportedly pressured by his own institution to change his rating after Enron complained. The message spread through Wall Street like wildfire. Don't question Enron. This pattern of silencing critics appeared again with Theranos, where Elizabeth Holmes threatened journalists and ex-employees who dared to speak the truth. The fifth tactic is regulatory capture, placing your people inside the agencies that are supposed to oversee you. Enron wasn't just lobbying for favorable laws. They were literally helping to staff the organizations meant to regulate energy markets. Former Enron executives moved into government positions. Government officials joined Enron's board. The revolving door spun so fast that the line between regulator and regulated essentially disappeared. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented public record. When the cops are on your payroll, you can operate with impunity. The sixth tactic is the cult of personality around leadership. Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling weren't just presented as executives. They were portrayed as visionary geniuses, prophets of a new economic paradigm. Business magazines put them on covers. Universities invited them to give lectures. Politicians sought their counsel. This worship of the CEO served a crucial function. It made questioning the company feel like questioning genius itself. If Ken Lay says the numbers are good, who are you to doubt him? The same dynamic played out with Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos, with Adam Newman at WeWork, with Sam Bankman-Fried at FTX. The charismatic leader becomes a shield that deflects all scrutiny. And the seventh tactic, perhaps the most cynical of all, is the exit strategy. While Enron executives were publicly proclaiming confidence in the company's future, they were quietly selling their own shares. Ken Lay sold over $90 million in stock in the year before the collapse. Jeffrey Skilling cashed out and resigned months before everything fell apart. The decisions they made with their own money told a completely different story than the words they spoke to employees and investors. Meanwhile, ordinary Enron workers were encouraged to load their retirement accounts with company stock that would soon be worthless. The executives escaped with fortunes. 20,000 employees lost everything. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because here's what's truly disturbing. Despite everything we learned from Enron, despite Sarbanes-Oxley and all the reforms that followed, this playbook continues to work. The tactics adapt, the names change, but the fundamental pattern repeats with alarming regularity. If you're recognizing these patterns from companies or situations in your own experience, write "same tactics" in the comments. The more we share what we've witnessed, the harder it becomes for this playbook to stay hidden. Here's what should keep you up at night. Everything I've just described happened over 20 years ago. Enron collapsed in 2001. The executives were prosecuted. New laws were passed. The entire financial world promised that lessons had been learned and safeguards had been implemented. Sarbanes-Oxley, one of the most significant pieces of corporate reform legislation in American history, was signed specifically to prevent another Enron from ever happening again. Auditor independence rules were strengthened. Executive certification requirements were added. Penalties for securities fraud were increased dramatically. Politicians gave speeches. Regulators patted themselves on the back. Everyone declared victory over corporate corruption. And yet here we are, 2 decades later, watching the same playbook execute flawlessly in company after company, after scandal, as if nothing had ever changed. Let me take you on a quick journey through the years since Enron, because the pattern is undeniable once you see it laid out. Just months after Enron's collapse, WorldCom imploded in what became an even larger bankruptcy. Same tactics: inflated earnings, hidden expenses, executives cashing out while employees lost everything. Then we got the 2008 financial crisis, where the largest banks in America packaged worthless mortgages into securities, sold them to unsuspecting investors, and when the whole thing collapsed, received taxpayer bailouts instead of prison sentences. The hidden truth that emerged from that catastrophe still shocks me every time I think about it. Not a single CEO of a major American bank went to prison for crimes related to the financial crisis. Not one. Zero. Billions of dollars in fraud. Millions of families losing their homes. The global economy pushed to the brink of collapse, and the people at the top walked away with their fortunes intact, paying fines that amounted to a fraction of their profits. Fast forward to more recent revelations. Wirecard, the German fintech darling that was once valued at $24 billion, collapsed in 2020 when investigators discovered that nearly $2 billion in cash simply didn't exist. The backstage reality was that auditors had been accepting screenshots as proof of bank balances. The same playbook: shell companies, intimidation of journalists, cozy relationships with regulators, a charismatic CEO who charmed investors and politicians alike. When it all fell apart, the CEO fled and is still missing. Some of the executives went to trial, but the damage was done, and most of the money has never been recovered. And then there's FTX, perhaps the most spectacular fraud of our generation. Sam Bankman-Fried built a cryptocurrency empire valued at $32 billion. He testified before Congress. He donated to political campaigns on both sides. He appeared on magazine covers as the future of finance, and behind the scenes, customer funds were being funneled into his hedge fund. Losses were being hidden, and the entire operation was held together by lies and spreadsheets that would have embarrassed a first-year accounting student. The transformation from golden boy to convicted felon happened in a matter of weeks. But here's what matters. For years, the warnings were there. Journalists raised questions, competitors expressed doubts, and the financial establishment embraced him anyway because he fit the pattern they wanted to see. Young, brilliant, disruptive, confident. The mentality that allows this to keep happening isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. And this brings us to one of the most important concepts for understanding why the playbook still works. Too big to jail. This phrase emerged after 2008, when it became clear that certain institutions and certain individuals exist in a protected category where normal rules of accountability simply don't apply. The logic, as it was explained by prosecutors and regulators, goes something like this. If we criminally prosecute a major bank, the economic consequences could be catastrophic. Jobs would be lost. Markets would panic. The cure would be worse than the disease. So instead of prison time, we get deferred prosecution agreements. We get fines that sound large in press releases but represent pennies on the dollar of illegal profits. We get executives who resign quietly, collect their golden parachutes, and resurface a few years later on the boards of other companies. Compare this to how the justice system treats ordinary crime. A teenager caught selling small amounts of drugs can face decades in prison. Someone who robs a convenience store for a few $100s might spend years behind bars. But an executive who orchestrates a fraud affecting millions of people, destroying retirement savings and pension funds and life's work of ordinary families, that person faces what exactly? A fine paid by shareholders, a few years of house arrest in a mansion, maybe, in extreme cases, a short stint in a minimum security facility that's more like a resort than a prison. The decisions about who deserves punishment and who deserves protection reveal everything about whose interests the system actually serves. I want to be careful here, because this isn't about cynicism or hopelessness. Understanding these patterns isn't meant to make you throw up your hands and accept that corruption is inevitable. The impact of this knowledge should be the opposite. When you recognize the playbook, you can spot it earlier. You can ask better questions. You can protect yourself and your family from becoming collateral damage in someone else's scheme. You can support journalists and whistleblowers who expose these patterns at great personal risk. You can vote for leaders who take corporate accountability seriously. Awareness is the first step toward transformation. But we also need to be honest about what we're facing. The system isn't broken. I need you to really hear that. The system isn't broken. It was designed this way. It was designed to create the appearance of accountability while protecting the powerful from real consequences. Every reform that gets passed contains loopholes that smart lawyers can exploit. Every regulatory agency gets captured by the industries it's supposed to oversee. Every promise of change gets quietly undermined by lobbying and campaign contributions. This is the architecture of corruption at its most sophisticated, and pretending otherwise only makes us more vulnerable. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding why the playbook works is only half the battle. The real question, the one that matters for your life, your career, your decisions, is how do you recognize when you're inside one of these systems, and what do you do about it? If the phrase, "the system isn't broken, it was designed this way," resonates with something you've suspected for a long time, drop a comment and write, "designed this way." Let's see how many of us have been thinking the same thing. So let's come full circle now and return to the question I asked at the very beginning of this journey. What exactly separates organized crime from organized business? We've walked through the structure, the soldiers, the tactics, and the legacy. We've seen how the same pillars that hold up street gangs hold up corrupt corporations. We've watched the same playbook execute across decades, across industries, across continents. And now we need to confront the uncomfortable truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Picture two scenarios. In the first, a young man from a disadvantaged neighborhood puts together a scheme that defrauds people out of $10,000. Maybe it's a hustle, maybe it's desperation, maybe it's the only path he saw available to him. When he gets caught, and he will get caught because he doesn't have lawyers or lobbyists or political connections, he faces years in prison. His life is effectively over. He'll carry that felony conviction forever, locked out of jobs, housing, opportunities. Society will label him a criminal and treat him accordingly. The punishment is swift, severe, and permanent. In the second scenario, a CEO in a corner office orchestrates a fraud worth $10 billion. He destroys the retirement savings of thousands of families. He wipes out pension funds. He costs employees their jobs, their homes, their futures. When it finally collapses, and it always eventually collapses, he hires the best defense attorneys money can buy. He negotiates a settlement where the company pays a fine and admits no wrongdoing. Maybe he steps down with a severance package worth tens of millions. A few years later, he's giving speeches at business conferences, serving on corporate boards, perhaps even writing a book about leadership and resilience. The transformation from perpetrator to elder statesman happens almost seamlessly. Here's the question that nobody wants to answer honestly. What is the real difference between these two scenarios? Not the legal difference. We all understand that laws are written and enforced differently depending on who you are. I'm asking about the moral difference, the ethical difference, the human difference. If both individuals caused harm through deception and fraud, why does one become a cautionary tale about the dangers of street crime, while the other becomes a case study in business schools? The hidden truth embedded in how we answer this question reveals everything about what our society actually values and who it actually protects. I've spent a lot of time researching this topic, and I'll tell you what I've concluded. The difference isn't moral, it isn't ethical. It isn't about the severity of the crime or the harm caused to victims. The difference is purely about power, who has it and who doesn't. The young man from the disadvantaged neighborhood operates outside the system. He has no protection, no connections, no resources. The CEO operates from inside the system. He helped build the system. He funded the campaigns of politicians who write the laws. He sat on boards with the people who run regulatory agencies. He donated to universities that train the lawyers and accountants who enable his schemes. Crime committed from outside the system gets punished. Crime committed from inside the system gets managed. This is the backstage reality of how power actually operates in our society. And recognizing it isn't about becoming cynical or hopeless. It's about seeing clearly so you can make better decisions about your own life. If you're an investor, knowing this playbook means you can spot the warning signs before you become collateral damage. Excessive complexity in financial statements. Aggressive accounting that books profits before they're earned. A charismatic CEO who attacks anyone who questions him. Auditors who seem more like partners than watchdogs. These are the red flags that should make you walk away, no matter how exciting the story sounds. If you're an employee, Knowing this playbook means you can recognize when you're being recruited into something compromising. That pressure to not ask questions, that culture of loyalty above ethics, those bonuses that seem too good to be true, designed to make leaving feel impossible. The earlier you recognize these patterns, the easier it is to get out before you become complicit in something you'll regret. And if you're a citizen, which all of us are, knowing this playbook means you can see through the theater of corporate accountability. When a company pays $1 billion fine but nobody goes to prison, that's not justice. That's a cost of doing business. When regulators announce crackdowns but the same patterns keep repeating, that's not reform. That's performance. When politicians promise to get tough on corporate crime but keep cashing checks from corporate PACs, that's not leadership. That's capture. The impact of understanding all of this should be empowerment, not despair. Knowledge of the manual is the first step toward not becoming a victim of it. Every person who learns to read these patterns is one more person who can protect themselves, warn others, and demand better from the institutions that shape our lives. The playbook works because it operates in darkness, because most people don't know it exists, because the complexity is designed to confuse and overwhelm. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once enough people see it, the playbook becomes harder to run. This journey we've taken together today, from the comparison of mobsters and executives, through the structure and soldiers and tactics, to the sobering reality of why this keeps happening. This journey matters because it changes how you see the world. Not in a paranoid way, not in a conspiracy theory way, but in a clear-eyed, informed, empowered way that makes you a harder target and a more engaged citizen. Now I want to close this conversation with something that brings all of these threads together, because there's one final insight that I think matters more than anything else we've discussed. If this journey has shifted how you see the relationship between crime and business, between power and accountability, comment below and write "Eyes open now." Let's build a community of people who refuse to be fooled by the playbook. And if you've made it this far with me, I just want to say thank you. Genuinely. In a world full of distractions, choosing to spend this time diving deep into something that actually matters, that means something. It tells me you're the kind of person who wants to understand how things really work, not just accept the surface-level story everyone else is being fed. This is the kind of content I pour myself into. Research, connections, revelations that I think more people need to hear. And if it resonated with you, if it sparked something or shifted a perspective even slightly, that like button is how the algorithm knows to keep showing this to people who need it. It's a small thing, but it makes a real difference. If you're not subscribed yet and you found value in this journey, come along for the ride. I'm constantly exploring these hidden patterns, the backstage dynamics of money, power, and the systems that shape our lives. There's always more to uncover, and I'd love to have you here when the next piece drops. Drop a comment and write "Stayed till the end" so I know who my real ones are. I read the comments, and honestly, seeing that phrase pop up reminds me why I make these videos in the first place. Now there's a video right here that takes this conversation even further. A perfect next step if you want to keep pulling on this thread. Click on it, and I'll see you over there.